Welcome back to another Voyage to the Sunken City card review, and this time around we actually have quite a few cards. Kicking things off with Emergency Maneuvers, a new Hunter secret with the sickest art I've ever seen. It looks so cool, and I hope I get to see this big Hydra as the Hunter Colossal. That'd be pretty sick. This is a 2-mana spell. Secret: when a friendly minion dies, summon a copy of it. It's dormant for 1 turn. So we have a little bit of a resurrection effect here. Got some major redemption vibes. A secret that's bringing your minion back to life, but a little bit of upside and a little bit of downside compared to redemption. The upside is that you do get a full-sized copy of the minion back. So if you're got some giant death rattle minion, it's going to come back fully sized, which can be nice. That 1 health on redemption can be a problem sometimes, but it's going to be dormant when it comes back. So you've got a bit of a delay here where you're not going to be able to utilize that minion to great effect right away. I'm not going to be attacking face if it happens to stick on board, nor if it's like a taunt, for instance, will it disrupt your opponent. They can just clear it, not have to worry about it because it's dormant, and just keep smacking you in the face. So, it kind of depends on the situation, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing. I would argue you probably want more minions faster, and it's often a bad thing, particularly in combination with the fact that this is a spell that works best with bigger cards. You want big, giant death rattles off this to maximize the value output. So sometimes playing it on turn 2 either isn't going to do anything for a while or might actually be a liability, because if you want to play other minions shortly thereafter, they may not be great targets for the emergency maneuvers to actually proc. And that means you might be sitting on this in hand for a while or just getting really low output out of it, both of which can certainly delay this card. I also don't know that it's particularly synergistic with the other secret synergy cards or packages available to hunters. Some cards might be pretty disappointing to get back off of the maneuver. So are you putting this in like a big death rattle deck to maximize its upside? In that case, how well does it fit into the rest of that package? Can you support secrets really nicely in that world? Those are big questions to answer. So I do think this one's going to land a little more on the awkward side than the like hyper high roll efficient side. And that's probably going to mean this card doesn't get played a ton. I think there's just a little too many problems to solve with this one. So next up's the Wrath Spine Enchanter for Shaman, a 7-mana 5/4 Naga. Battlecry casts a copy of a Fire, Frost, and Nature spell in your hand, targets chosen randomly. So in a lot of ways, this has sort of clumsy courier vibes. You could use this to cheat out some big spells, or in some cases, just a lot of spells. Now, it won't always be the biggest spell like Clumsy Courier, which you could argue is a downside. But overall, I think you're expecting this to just do a lot more stuff because you're getting 3 spells. And if you build your deck in the right way, you can have cards like Charged Call is currently a pretty good nature spell option. Don't Stand in the Fire is a decent fire option because it's always going to hit enemy minions based on its text. And then there's even like Glaciate for frost spells. I could just summon you a big frozen minion. So you could basically clear your opponent's stuff, summon maybe a couple big things off Charged Call and Glaciate. I think that's the sort of ideal scenario for this card. The challenge, of course, there is the deck building requirements, because if you want to get that to work, you can't run cheap, risky fire and frost and nature spells that might, for instance, hit yourself in the face or clear your own board or backfire in major ways based on this chosen randomly sort of text. So you've got that restriction. You've also just got to have the stuff in hand, and like, Charge Call, you got to load that one up. So is that a good nature spell? Sometimes. Is Glaciate really even that good of a payoff? Yeah, sometimes. So I think there are a couple challenges to building around this thing, and then also just finding the right game states and scenarios where your hand is lined up well and it's making sense for you to play a card like this one. But if the right cards come along that allow you to cheat them out even faster, some crazy big nature spell or fire spell, cards like this get a window to succeed a little more as they move into that Clumsy Courier kind of space, as opposed to relying a little more on the chaos aspect of things. If you can control the scenario with a guaranteed really nice payoff, which I'm not convinced the ones I listed are that good, and there's not many beyond that currently in Standard, that's where this starts to shine. But it's still got some stuff. It's 7 mana, so it's slower. It's dependent on your deck, and it's dependent on game state. And all of those are major risks. Next up is a Demon Hunter card whose name we still don't have the full translation for at the time of recording, but the effect here is right. It's a 2/2 Naga at 2 mana, and it's got Outcast. Reduce the cost of your left and rightmost card in your hand by 1. So some cheap mana reduction here. Essentially, if you're able to outcast this, you're kind of getting it for free or banking that mana for the future, or maybe just using this to cheat out an extra 2/2 while playing some other stuff that you've discounted alongside it. And you can imagine worlds where with like Quest Demon Hunter, this goes down to 0 when you draw it, and then it further discounts stuff in hand, and you just start chaining like crazy with Razorglaive Sentinel and the new card that attacks anytime you're playing spells. So you could see a kind of miracle-y Demon Hunter list coming together. That said, this card is only a total of 2 mana discount. And when I compare it to something like Efficient Octobot back in the day, right, like that was a way more universal hand-wide discount, and that's what made that card so freaking strong. But this has this conditionality with the Outcast that could sometimes be a little awkward too. I mean, obviously Octobot's a card you had to activate as well, but I don't think it was all that difficult. Outcast isn't either, but it just creates some moments where it's like, this thing, I gotta wait a while to play this. I wanted to discount the skull over there, whatever it is, and this thing's stuck in the middle. So I do have some concerns there. And then the ultimate output of this is still just 2 mana. Like, is that actually enough? It feels a little bit like a Conjure Mana Biscuit in that way, but it's maybe a little bit less controlled and less timed in your favor. So I have a feeling a lot of decks will be able to just give this one up and not really care too much about the 2 mana for a 2 mana discount. They're probably going to have better things to do in a lot of cases. So next up here is Volcano Mage, and this is a mage spell. I saw this like half asleep. I thought it was a shaman spell. Volcanoes are things we've seen in shaman a ton. Kind of feels like a shaman spell. Looks like a shaman spell a lot. But it's a mage spell. It's 2 mana. It's a fire spell, of course. And with this one, you choose a minion, and then when that minion dies, it's going to deal 3 damage to all other minions. Now, actually, I said something there that may not be true. I don't believe the minion actually deals the damage. I think it's still the spell dealing the damage. So there's, as far as I'm interpreting it, no additional synergies here if you like give this to a poisonous minion or a lifesteal minion. I don't think it's gonna proc a bunch of poisonous or a bunch of lifesteal. I think ultimately the spell will still be doing the damage. It's almost like a aura or remembrance of some kind as opposed to the minion itself. Still up for debate perhaps, but I'm operating under that assumption. Despite that, this card is still really intriguing, I think, because it creates some big problems for your opponent sometimes. If they play like a 2-drop out, you might just have a Volcano Mage, pop it on their 2 mana card, and then not kill it, and just wait. And then it's like, oh god, as soon as I play more stuff, they're going to kill this 2-drop, and then my whole board is going to be gone. So it has this sort of doomsayer effect almost, where it really limits your opponent's ability to actually commit things to the board, or they have to do it in a way where they're going to have higher than 3 health, which might be awkward for a lot of decks to do. So it's this sort of time bomb that you're putting out there and then just saying, hey, deal with this, figure it out. When am I going to pop this thing? And I think that can create some interesting scenarios. There is some risk there as well, of course, where you may not have a way to kill the minion immediately. And this feels a bit like a dead card. You might need an immediate board clear, and you don't have one because Volcano Mage is sort of a 2-part setup. So I think only certain decks will value that kind of delayed payoff, and certain metas as well will facilitate that more than others, particularly depending on minion health breakpoints. If it's a bunch of 2 or 3 health stuff, this might make a lot more sense. You might need bigger removals or more single target removals depending on the meta. Now, of course, this can also be used on your own minions. It's not just on your opponent's minions. So if you have a minion lingering around on board or a small rush minion, you can use that as a pretty easy way to activate this on top of any spells that might kill your opponent's stuff. So a handful of different use cases. I'm still a little unsure about this card because of that delay, but I think it's big enough. Like dealing 3 to everything for 2 is pretty dang efficient, even if it requires a little bit of a follow-up. I think that's probably going to make some sense. And I can see this being a card that just has high output for low cost, which Mage historically likes low cost spells. This fits right in. Also has some fire upside for a variety of fire synergy cards available to Mage. Moving on here to the Naga Giant, a new 20 mana minion. That's so cool. It's an 8/8 Naga, of course, and it costs 1 less for each mana you've spent on spells this game. So it's not spells you've played like we've seen with past Giants. It's mana you've spent. So if you break down the math on this, if you were to spend a full curve of mana throughout the early game, so 1 mana, 2 mana, 3 mana, 4 mana, 5 mana, this would become playable on turn 6 organically. You could either spend 5 mana on this on 6 or play another spell and push it down to 0 or whatever whatever amount to sort of fill in that curve on turn 6. And that's like perfect scenario, right? If you have every card to play on curve on time, that's turn 6. I think more reasonably organically, you'd probably hit this around turn 7 or turn 8. And free 8/8s are great, don't get me wrong, but I think that's just a hair slow. I think if this were like a 15 mana card, it would be very, very good. At 20, I get a little bit nervous about that organic use case. It's not as fast as things like Flesh Giants. And yes, of course, Flesh Giants were OP, but that's what made them good. That's what made them really strong cards and meta defining for a while. I don't see Naga Giant becoming even Flesh Giant adjacent. I think it's going to be a few turns slower, and that's probably a good thing for the record. Flesh Giants were very, very hard to deal with. But just from a competitive standpoint, this is not going to be, I think, that super scary 0 mana card that comes down very early in a game to kind of ease your concerns or fears there. That said, there are, of course, some other use cases for a card like this that I think have potential, but I still worry this may not be the payoff that makes them good. So Celestial Alignment is one thing that comes to mind, because once you push this to 1 mana, it naturally just goes down to 0 right away. So you could use this on your Celestial Alignment turn to take a kind of swing on board. I think that could really help the turn you play Celestial to make sure you're actually still committing to the board and not taking an entire pass turn on that Celestial. We've also got stuff like the new Paladin Big Spell, Big Holy package, where you've got some really hefty spells like the new 10 mana spell that also gets discounted when you spend mana on spells. So you might be able to develop a really big swing turn off the back of that, play some of these, play that 5/5 Divine Shield buff, and hope that that's enough to win. But in both those cases, Celestial got nerfed. I think the Paladin deck's coming online a little late. I worry that just playing some big stats on board on turn 7, on turn 8, on turn 9 is often not going to be enough anymore. Number one, you might just be dead because you've been sitting on all these cards in hand or not really doing a lot in the meantime. Number two, your opponent might just have removal by then. They've just got more and more time to get the kinds of removal necessary to deal with these sorts of boards. So I think these stat swings become less impactful the later the game goes on, and that's naturally when the payoffs for Naga Giant are going to be happening. So I have concerns about this card getting down in time to be competitive. But again, that might actually be a good thing. There's also like Ramp Druid that makes a little bit of sense for this one, but we're losing Overgrowth and we don't have a spell-based ramp replacement yet. So like, yeah, Guff ramps, but he's also not spending mana to make this cheaper, faster. So I don't know if that gets there. The one thing I did see mentioned that I liked was Refreshing Spring Water. So like, you know, your Spring Water turn, that's theoretically a 9 mana turn for only 5 total mana to start. That could be a way to cheese out the Naga Giant a little faster. So maybe keep an eye on this in Mage, but I still have my doubts, which again, I think is actually a good thing. So next up, we're going to talk about my cards. I revealed these 3 Diver cards, this fun little cycle, kicking it off with a Pelican Diver. This is a 1 mana 4/1 beast. He's dormant for 1 turn only, and he has Rush. So this dormant for 1 turn, I think, is surprisingly good. It's basically like just saying this minion's guaranteed to be alive next turn, and because they have Rush, that means they're usually guaranteed to get some kind of upside or value on the following turn. So you play this on 1, for instance, your opponent says, oh my god, I can't deal with that. They're going to have a 4-attack minion on board. I can't play my 2-drop. It's just going to die. And then you're like, ah, crap. Alternatively, if your deck that like has buffs, for instance, say you're Hunter with Doggy Biscuit, you can play the Pelican Diver on 1 and know for a fact it's going to be there on your turn 2 for your Doggy Biscuit, and then suddenly you have a 6/4 minion on board on turn 2 with Rush. And it's like, oh my god, that could really snowball a game in your favor. It's not going to be able to go face right away, but still a monster threat and a guaranteed buff deposit. Obviously, there are other buffs and upsides that might exist there. There's even this really cool thing you could do with Bioluminescence, the new spell damage card for Shaman, where you play both of these on a turn, and then you're guaranteed to have minions for the next turn to play a Bioluminescence for a bunch of extra spell damage on top of whatever other minions you might have. So knowing that you have a minion next turn can really do some cool things to set up better plays, but also I think this one in particular is just really efficient on its own. Just getting this minion down is pretty nice for only 1 mana, and it creates some real friction for your opponent. So I think Pelican Diver is actually a really solid option and a pretty high output card for 1 mana. So next up is the Slime Scale Diver, and this one's the Murloc version. He's a 3 mana 2/4, dormant for 1 turn with Rush and poisonous. So this minion is just disruptive, dude. Playing this down has got to be a nightmare for your opponent where they just don't know how to get around this because they can't play minions into it. They're guaranteed that that minion will be dead. Play that big threat, whatever it is. It's dead to the meager slime scale diver. Or if you just play this on curve, I think very often it'll be able to take a value trade over something with like 3 attack and then be left behind as a threat still that might trade up again. So I think this just creates real predicaments for your opponent where they just don't know how to play into this safely. And they might just have to kind of figure this thing out for like 2 turns where they can't play anything into it. They got to wait for it to pop up. Then they got to kill it before they play their thing. I think that is some real potential. Now, that said, this is still delayed and kind of removal that puts it in your opponent's control to some extent, which is not always the kind of removal you want. Sometimes you want removal right now, because if they have that 8/8 that's getting ready to hit you next turn, you need to kill it now, not next turn. So I think a lot of decks that care about removal will indeed have to focus on removal that is more immediate, and they can control exactly what it's going to hit right on demand, as opposed to this setup removal that might be very efficient but is less controllable in a lot of ways. So what that means is I don't see a lot of control decks or decks that need removal really relying on the slime scale diver much. I think it's more about maybe a Murloc deck, but then you think Murloc decks might want to be more aggressive as well. It's like, do they really need this removal card? Maybe they want just more stats and more pressure and more damage output, as opposed to this, which pivots in a slightly different direction. They might value having a Murloc to like buff or set up for a future turn, but still not the most hyper efficient stat play for an aggressive Murloc deck. So I do think this card's like kind of nuts in a vacuum, and certainly it seems like an arena this could be a really problematic kind of card. But in standard, I feel like a lot of decks are just going to leave this one to the side because they have more immediate, more direct sorts of things that solve the same kinds of problems that it does. So a really interesting card. I love the design of this, but I don't think that many standard decks are going to be able to run this. Maybe just one occasionally where it really fits into that mold perfectly. And then finally here is the Gangplank Diver. This is the pirate version of the divers. He's a 5-mana 6/4, dormant for 1 turn with rush and immune while attacking. So for this one, it's all about taking a trade while leaving behind a threat. The 6/4 body can obviously pump out a lot of damage if your opponent can't efficiently deal with it. Also some cool plays where if you like play this on 5, you can smite on 6, and then you're dealing like 12 damage guaranteed the following turn. All that said, this one's way more expensive than the other divers. At 5 mana, this is a big commitment. And even though it's taking a really good trade the next turn, I think 5 mana is such a key turn to really start swinging a game that pushing it back a turn and kind of doing nothing on 5, your opponent might just be hitting you in the face with stuff, developing crazy stuff. I don't know if the Gangplank Diver is going to be able to pull it back on 6 strong enough for that to make sense. You're just giving up so much in the meantime. And your opponent could also say like, okay, you got a Gangplank Diver. I'm just going to play like 4 small minions so this doesn't get efficient trades. I'm not going to play a 6/6 into your Gangplank Diver. So I think it's actually a little bit easier for your opponent to figure this one out as opposed to the other minions where they seem like they're better suited at their mana cost at resolving problems. This one seems a little iffier. So I don't really see this one getting played in Pirate Warrior. I don't think it's aggressive enough, too unreliable. So for me, that's a big concern. Yeah, sure, it's going to pop off Juggernaut and create some interesting scenarios sometimes. Might actually be bad that it's dormant for a turn. You might want more immediate pressure. And I don't think the Smite combo stuff is worth it. That just doesn't seem like enough damage consistency to me, and that's rarely going to be hit because Smite's a 1-of. So all in all, I think the Gangplank Diver here is actually the weakest of the divers, primarily due to its cost. That's just a big commitment to make in Hearthstone at 5 mana. Emergency Maneuvers is a 2-star card. Wrath Spine Enchanter is a 3-star card. This Demon Hunter Naga Lady is a 3-star card. Volcano Mage is a 4-star card. Naga Giant is a 3-star card. Pelican Diver's a 4-star card. Slime Scale Diver's a 2-star card. Gangplank Diver's a 1-star card. And there you go, that wraps it up for this review. Lots of cards this time. Let me know your thoughts on all of these in the comments below. Do you like the Naga Giant way more than me? I think it's okay, just not... It's not good, and I think that's a good thing. But share your thoughts. Look forward to reading those. Thanks so much, as always, for watching. Stay tuned for more reviews, and until next time, game on.